There are people walking this earth who feel things that were never meant to be felt. Not just their own pain, not just their own grief, but yours. The strangers sitting 3 seats away. The colleague who smiled too hard at the morning meeting. The city humming with 1,000 invisible frequencies that no one else seems to notice. But you notice. You've always noticed. And for most of your life, you thought something was wrong with you. You were called too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But what if that was never the truth? What if you weren't broken? What if you were receiving? There is a certain kind of human being who moves through the world differently. Not louder, not more visible, quieter, actually, more withdrawn. But underneath that stillness, there is a storm of perception that most people will never experience. They are called empaths. And today, we are going to go somewhere most videos never go. Not the surface, not the checklist. We are going into the psychology, the shadow, the spiritual anatomy of what it truly means to carry this gift, and why, for so many empaths, it has felt less like a gift and more like a sentence. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you may finally understand your entire life. Let's begin with something every empath knows intimately, but has never been able to fully explain to someone who doesn't feel it. Not just the noise, not just the chaos, something deeper than that. When most people walk into a crowded room, a bar, a concert, a busy street on a Friday night, they feel energy. They feel alive, stimulated, excited. When an empath walks into that same room, something completely different happens. It begins almost immediately. A subtle weight, a pressure behind the eyes, a low hum of anxiety that builds and builds until the only thought left is, I need to get out of here. And here is what nobody tells you. It isn't the noise causing this. It isn't social anxiety, though that's often the misdiagnosis. What's actually happening is something far more complex, far more real. An empath doesn't just observe the emotions in a room, they absorb them. Every person in that crowd is emitting an emotional field: frustration, longing, quiet desperation, forced laughter covering something broken underneath, joy that doesn't quite reach the eyes. And the empath's nervous system, wired entirely differently from the average person, picks up every single frequency simultaneously. Imagine standing in the middle of 100 radios, all tuned to different stations, all playing at full volume, and not being able to turn a single one off. That is what a crowded room feels like to an empath. It's not weakness. It's not drama. It is an overwhelm of information that the human nervous system was never designed to process all at once. And after years of not understanding why they felt this way, most empaths simply learned to avoid it. Canceling plans last minute, leaving early without explanation, choosing the window seat closest to the exit. Does this sound familiar? Comment below. Have you ever left a social situation feeling like you'd been emptied? Like something was taken from you that you didn't agree to give? That feeling has a name, and you are not alone in it. But it doesn't end when the crowd thins. Because an empath doesn't just absorb the emotions of people, they absorb the energy of places. There is something that most people walk past every day without a second thought: the emotional residue embedded in a location. Ancient traditions understood this. Indigenous cultures built entire rituals around the idea that land holds memory, that certain places carry wounds, that some corners of the earth have been soaked in so much suffering that to stand there is to feel it. Empaths don't need to be taught this. They already know it. They've walked into a building and felt something cold that had nothing to do with temperature. They've driven through certain neighborhoods and felt their chest tighten for no rational reason. They've stood in historical places and been moved to tears by something they couldn't name. And this is why so many empaths are extraordinarily deliberate about where they live. Not just the aesthetics, not just the commute, the energy. An empath living in a dense, chaotic, high-crime urban environment isn't just mildly uncomfortable. They are in a state of constant energetic siege, every day pulling in the collective tension of thousands of people living under stress, under threat, under invisible psychological weight. Over time, this depletes them in ways that look, from the outside, like depression, like burnout, like an inability to function. But it isn't depression. It is energetic saturation. And almost intuitively, empaths are drawn toward the opposite. Quieter places, less populated spaces, areas where the air feels clean not just chemically, but spiritually, where the land hasn't been soaked in human suffering, where stillness is possible, where they can finally exhale. This is why the empath often seems antisocial, selective, strange in their preferences. They aren't being difficult. They are surviving. Now we come to the mechanism at the very core of what makes an empath who they are. And this is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Because most empaths spend years, decades, not realizing this is happening. When you are with someone who is angry, do you begin to feel agitated? Even if the anger isn't directed at you, even if you know it isn't yours. When someone around you is grieving, do you feel that grief settle into your own chest, like a stone that wasn't there before? When someone walks into a room carrying invisible stress, do you pick it up before they've said a single word? This is not imagination. This is not projection. This is energetic absorption, and it is the defining characteristic of the empath. Here is what is happening at a deeper level. Human beings are not just physical bodies. Ancient traditions, from the Vedic teachings of India to the mystical schools of ancient Egypt to the shamanic traditions of indigenous cultures worldwide, all agreed on something modern science is only beginning to approach. The human body generates an electromagnetic field, an energy body. And for most people, this field has natural boundaries. For the empath, those boundaries are almost non-existent. They came into this world open, receptive, like a frequency receiver with no filter. And so when you sit across from someone in pain, their energy field literally enters yours. Their emotional state becomes your emotional state, not metaphorically, physiologically. Your cortisol rises, your nervous system shifts, your mood, your thoughts, your physical sensations all begin to mirror theirs. And here's the tragic part. Most empaths don't realize this is happening. They just know they feel different after being around certain people. Heavier, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, sad for reasons they can't explain. They assume it's their own feeling. They carry it, process it, lose sleep over it, and it was never theirs to begin with. This is the shadow side of the empath's gift, the cost no one talks about. And until an empath learns to recognize this exchange, to build what the ancient teachings called energetic discernment, they will spend their life carrying weight that belongs to everyone else. There is a kind of knowing that exists beneath logic, beneath evidence, beneath everything the rational mind can explain. Empaths live there permanently. You've met someone for the first time, and within moments, before a word of real conversation, you knew. Not a suspicion, not a guess, a knowing. Something about this person isn't what they're presenting. Something is hidden. Something is broken. Something is dangerous. And months later, you were proven right. Most people explain this away. Call it instinct, call it body language reading, call it good judgment. But empaths know it isn't any of those things. It is something older, something that predates modern psychological language entirely. Ancient traditions called it clairsentience, the ability to feel truth rather than analyze it. The Gnostics wrote of it. The shamanic traditions trained people to develop it. Carl Jung described a form of it when he wrote about the unconscious receiving information through channels the conscious mind doesn't understand. For the empath, this isn't mystical theory. It's Tuesday. You see through people not because you're suspicious, but because you feel the gap between who they're performing and who they actually are. Someone smiles. You feel the grief behind the smile. Someone speaks confidently. You feel the fear underneath the confidence. Someone tells you they're fine, and you sit with the quiet knowledge that they are anything but fine. This gift, and it is a genuine gift, is also profoundly isolating. Because when you've always known things before they were spoken, when deception has never quite worked on you, you begin to understand that most human interaction is performance. And that knowledge is heavy. It creates a deep loneliness. The loneliness of seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable illusions. Have you felt this? That particular kind of alone, not from lack of connection, but from too much perception. Here we arrive at the wound, the one most empaths carry silently. For years, sometimes for a lifetime. Every other person on Earth, by instinct, by design, places their own needs at the center of their experience. This is biological, survival encoded. It is not selfishness, it is human architecture. But the empath is wired differently. When someone near them is in pain, the empath's own pain becomes irrelevant, not by conscious choice, by reflex. You could be in the middle of your own crisis, grieving, breaking, barely holding together, and someone reaches out in need, and the switch flips. You listen. You hold space. You give guidance. You stay on the phone until 3 a.m., and you never once mention what you are carrying. This is not virtue. This is a pattern, often a trauma pattern. Many empaths learned very early in life that their value was conditional on their usefulness, on their ability to soothe, to help, to fix. And so they internalized a belief, unspoken, unconscious, devastating, that their own pain is less important, that their needs are a burden, that to be seen in their own suffering is somehow an imposition. And so they carry it alone. They become the person everyone leans on while having no one to lean on themselves. The healer who cannot heal themselves. The light holder who sits alone in the dark. Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile into unconsciousness because we believe they make us unlovable. For the empath, the shadow is often their own need, their own pain, their own desire to be held rather than always doing the holding. If this is landing somewhere deep, it should, because the path forward for every empath begins with the same radical act, learning to treat their own pain as real, as valid, as worthy of the same presence they give so freely to everyone else. There is a phenomenon every empath recognizes and rarely knows how to name. Broken people find them. Not sometimes, always. The person at the party with the tragic history. The colleague with the invisible wound, the stranger on the train who begins talking, really talking, within minutes. They find the empath as if guided. And there's something even more specific happening here, something more psychologically precise that most spiritual channels never address. Empaths don't just attract broken people, they attract narcissists. And this is not coincidence. This is magnetism. The narcissist, fundamentally disconnected from genuine emotion, is drawn to the empath's vast emotional depth, like a man dying of thirst is drawn to water. The empath radiates something rare: unconditional understanding, deep listening, the capacity to see someone completely and not flinch. To a person whose entire psychology is built around the terror of being truly seen, the empath represents both the ultimate desire and the ultimate threat. And so the narcissist pursues. And the empath, wired to give without reserve, gives. This dynamic has devastated more empaths than almost any other experience in their lives, because the empath pours themselves completely into healing someone who is at the structural level unable to be healed by love alone. And when it ends, when the empath finally breaks under the weight of giving everything and receiving nothing, they do not just feel heartbreak. They feel emptied, used, foolish. But here is what the empath must understand. You were not foolish. You were generous beyond measure with someone who did not have the capacity to honor it. Your ability to attract people in need is not a flaw. It is evidence of your depth. The lesson is not to close. The lesson is to discern, to understand that the truest act of compassion sometimes looks like a boundary. The place every empath eventually returns to. When the world has taken too much, when the people have drained what seemed undrainable, when the noise has fractured something inside that conversation cannot repair, the empath goes to nature, not to sightsee, not for leisure, to restore. There is a reason ancient cultures built their sacred sites at the intersection of earth energies. The Celts spoke of thin places, locations where the veil between the physical and the spiritual world is thinner, where something ancient and restorative exists just beneath the surface of the visible. Empaths feel this in forests, in the presence of water, in the particular quality of light on an early morning field. Nature gives what human interaction almost never can presence without demand. A tree does not need you to fix it. The ocean does not require you to hold it together. The earth simply is, and in that isness, the empath finally gets to be, too. And then, the animals. Empaths are known for their extraordinary connection to animals. But this isn't just a preference, it is recognition. Animals communicate in the language that empaths have always spoken fluently. Energy. Not words, not performance, not the complex layers of human social masking. Pure, unfiltered, present moment emotional truth. A dog knows when you are sad before you've admitted it to yourself. A cat chooses the person in the room carrying the most invisible weight. Animals operate in the same register as the empath, and in their company, the empath feels something they rarely feel in human spaces. Understood, without explanation, without performance, without having to translate what they feel into language that others can accept. This is not a small thing. For a being who has spent their entire life translating their inner world into terms that others can tolerate, to finally be received without translation is nothing short of sacred. So these are the 7 things that most of the world has called strange, oversensitive, dramatic, eccentric. But you and I, we know now what these things actually are. They are the architecture of a different kind of consciousness, one that came into this world to feel what others cannot, to hold space for pain that would otherwise go unwitnessed, to love with a depth that most people only encounter once in a lifetime if they're fortunate. Being an empath is not a diagnosis. It is not a disorder. It is not a weakness dressed up in spiritual language. It is a way of being that the world desperately needs and almost never protects. Your work now, if you choose to accept it, is not to become less of what you are. It is to learn how to hold yourself with the same sacred tenderness you have always given so freely to everyone else. To build walls not of stone, but of discernment. To stop carrying energy that was never yours to carry. To finally, give yourself permission to be the person someone shows up for. The awakening isn't just understanding what you are. The awakening is choosing to honor it. You were never too much. You were always exactly enough. Tell me something. Have you spent most of your life feeling like you were carrying weight that wasn't yours? Have people always come to you not because you asked them to, but because something in you called to them? Comment empath below if this video felt less like content and more like someone finally handing you a mirror. And if you've been walking this path alone, unseen, unmissed, unwitnessed, follow Ether Compass. Because this channel exists for exactly one reason: to give language to the things you have always felt but never been able to name. The hidden truths are only beginning to surface.